Day 4 in building 100 startups for 100 days. Today's pick is user draft, which can help you to run a better user interviews. So far I have a messy process with the interviews. I simply jump in a screen sharing call with my users and I list with bullet points all the learnings I had from their experience, and I try to ask a couple of questions about their problems, about their current workflow, how big is the problem, all the goodies that are important to really understand the pain point and to understand what problem we're actually solving. The issue with this workflow that we're not prepared for that interview. We simply run it without any guide, and the goal of user draft is to give us that guide, give us the preparation, give us the questions we need to answer, and give us a structure that we can fill in and get all the information we need for our user interviews. First thing we need to do is to create a project and add some description about it, and from there we can add the information of our participants. For this example, I will go through a template which I created for a startup number 3, which is called Namerflow, which can help you to generate names for your startup and can check for available.com domain. We already run this interview with Peter earlier this week. You can go through the meeting there and get the user draft in action. For the template, I added a simple workflow there. Previously, we jumped straight to the screen sharing, but I want to tweak the process a little bit. I want to start with a 15-minute conversation without mentioning anything for the product, just to pull the information, the size of the problem, the current workflow, and when we don't share anything about the solution, we don't get any biased answers and we get the real information we can actually use. For the coverage, we can add some tags about important areas we want to touch on. This will be passed to the AI for the question generations. And here comes the preparation. We want to give ourselves a goal to create 10 questions about the interview, and for better accuracy I can add the first few questions by myself. And a question I like to add all the time, as most of the tools here are simply GPT wrappers, and you can really use GPT to generate the names. And why do you need a dedicated tool? And that's really important to know there. Does it really matter? Try to push the user to see, do they really need a solution, or they can simply use their current workflow, and with that we find the size of the problem. For the first question, I can use whisper flow to transcribe my speech. Why you don't simply use GPT or Quote to generate a name? Have you found any solutions on the market, any dedicated tools that are for name generation? Okay, and from here we can jump to the AI generation. We're passing the information for the project, for the persona, for the coverage checks, and the previous questions. And we can select the number of questions we want to generate. Let's go with 10, as we can remove some of them. Okay, we got the suggested questions. I'm not going to read through them. I'm simply going to include them to the table and start working on them here. Can you walk me through the steps to take from having an idea, choosing a name? Yep, that's cool for the current workflow. How much time that you usually spend checking names for project? Yes, that's really important to understand how much time they already wasted. What makes naming feel urgent or important when you're starting a project? I would tweak this a little bit. How urgent and important is choosing the right name for your project. Okay, what makes coming up with good name hardest for you? Okay, how hard it is to find a name. Okay, can you describe how you check if a .com is available? I think the answer of this is pretty straightforward. There's no other way than checking with GoDaddy or Namecheap. Of course, you can have a custom workflow, but I doubt most of the users will have this. And we already covered this in have used any other solutions on the market, so probably they will have this, so we have a duplicate. What would make the naming process faster or easier for you? What usually goes wrong when you try to pick a name? What does a good final name and domain looks like to you? Okay, and one that I just thought of. Who is involved? I can use WhisperFlow. Who is involved into the decision-making process for choosing name for your project? Okay, and here we have 8 questions that cover some of the workflow, size of the problem that we can use for our interview. And I can start a session to describe some of the learnings from a few days earlier that we had with Peter. Screen sharing, we had a meeting with Peter and it was I think on 21st. And I can create a new session here. In the session, we'll see the questions from the template that we can fill straight in. Once we're done answering the question, we can simply tick and go with the next one. Okay, why don't you simply use GPT or quote to generate a name? Temporary GPT or quote. I remember we covered this. I already tried GPT with no success. I couldn't find any relevant name that I liked. It just gives me dummy unrelevant data. That was something he mentioned earlier in the interview, that he wasn't happy with the suggestions and simply he couldn't achieve his goals, which is a good enough problem for me. Have you found any solutions on the market, any dedicated tools that you're for name? No, I haven't found anything. Okay, they simply tried using GPT. Can you walk me through a step that take having how much time? Actually, I haven't used user draft for the interview, so I haven't even asked this question, so this is a really good thing to come back later to ask. How much time do you usually spend? He mentioned he didn't mention how much time he spent, but he mentioned I've been trying to find a new name for the last year, which could be relevant for us. How urgent and important it is. It's not really important for me, but I've tried to find a name for so long and I'd really like to find a good name. So for the urgency, it's not something that they need to release tomorrow. It's a side project it would be just good enough, which can also answer the question, are they a right user? But still, it's nice to have this data for this interview. Okay, what does a good final name? I have no idea. I will know it when I see it. That is a great learning for the namer flow, as the whole idea here is to understand which is a good name once you see it. For people who don't have any criteria and don't have any idea what they're expecting, that's a great tool. And who is involved into decision making? My co-founder, and I would like to discuss the name with him to make the decision. Okay, we had a few answers here for the questions. Once we are done, we can copy one pager here. And we copy one pager, we can paste it to Notion so we can have the full document of the information for the interview, for the project, together with all the questions and answers. So this can help us to share it with somebody else, or if we prefer a document structure for having the information, we can have it in this way too. And that's it about the interviews. From now on, for the 100 Startups Challenge, I will do the user interviews with user draft. I'll get the questions that are relevant for each startup, and as I run through the interview, I'll make sure I have a good data that I can rely on later on, which can help me to grow the projects and to make them better.